Okay, now to the economy and actually the accuracy of government data. Joining us now, Greg Mankiw. He served as counsel of economic advisors as the chair under George W. Bush, the second Bush. And it's good to see you. We used to be on quite a bit, Greg. It's been a while. Thanks for joining us.
Nice to be with you, Joe.
So we're talking to Sam Altman about the state of AI and GPT-5, and we now know that to get the most important economic numbers for the Fed to base all its policy on and for us to get a gauge of the U.S. economy, we send out stuff that we hope someone might answer at some point, but maybe they really won't, and they might send it back through snail mail, or maybe they don't, and we'll get some idea by the first Friday of the month about what it could be, but by the month later, it could be hundreds of thousands different, and by 2 months later, you might finally have something that might be in the ballpark. Is that any way to run a railroad?
Well, yeah, the data systems are antiquated. I think firing the head of the BLS was not a smart move. It seems like a petulant move, but I think complaining about the nature of the data may make some sense, and maybe, especially in this modern age where we can collect data from different sources and much faster than we could in the past. I think thinking how to modernize that is an important task ahead. To do that, though, probably would require increasing the funding of these statistical agencies, and they've been doing the opposite. They've been actually cutting the funding of these agencies over time, so they're having trouble even doing what they used to do as well as they used to do it. But I think looking ahead, increasing their funding for at least a while so they can modernize these systems does make some sense.
So it would, with the funding they have now, they have been unable to modernize the system?
Well, they're doing what one of the jobs is to create consistent data over time. And a lot of this data goes back to the post-World War II era. So when you modernize, you really want to do it very carefully because you want the new data to be broadly consistent with the old data. Otherwise, you're not going to really know how to interpret it. So I think that's a tricky task, but that doesn't mean it can't be done. There are people out there trying to come up with better measures. I have a colleague at Harvard Business School who has something called the Billion Prices Project that's following prices on the internet to track inflation even before the CPI sees it. So there's things out there. The ADP data, for example, that has not been incorporated into the employment data. So I think there's things to do, but it has to be done very carefully. And having a commission that sort of studies this, I think it makes sense. But that would cost money to do that.
Some other former commissioners came to the defense of the commissioner that it was fired, but then we heard from, for example, former Labor Secretary Elaine Chao, who said, the commissioner oversees what's going on, but doesn't really get involved in the minutia of the data, so any type of rigging or political aspirations, that wouldn't really be possible. So that's why I don't, in your op-ed, I don't see whether what you're saying really holds true, that now we got to worry about, whether the data is objective or whether it's been politicized. If no BLS commissioner can really do it anyway, why not say, look, you didn't do the job in terms of modernizing this. You didn't take the steps necessary to bring us out of this antiquated system. So you got to go. We'll get someone else in who also can't politicize it, but who at least might look at the problem and try and solve it. I don't know. I don't think it was rigged. But when we had the president, I said you had every right to fire someone for incompetence because the Fed has a big enough problem right now. They can't even, if they had current data, perfectly accurate current data, they still don't know what to do, whether to hike or to lower. And it's important.
Well, I believe the president has the right to fire the person, but the question is whether it was a wise thing to do or a petulant thing to do. He came out and said the data was rigged. That is completely wrong. I think even the former BLS commissioner that he had appointed said that was ridiculous.
No, I know.
And if he starts firing people every time he gets a piece of data he doesn't like, every time there's a revision he doesn't like, that's a very dangerous way to run a statistical agency. That's going to provide all the wrong set of incentives for the people running this. If they know that their job is at stake just because when they add up the numbers, it doesn't turn out the way the president wants. So that was just in my view,
it was the biggest revision. It's the biggest revision in 50 years. 2-month revision.
Well, in a time of very high uncertainty, you'd expect bigger revisions. And we live in a time of very high uncertainty, in part because of the president's policies. I mean, these tariffs, sometimes going on, sometimes going off, changing day to day, nobody really knowing where he's going. That creates a lot of uncertainty. And a lot of uncertainty is going to mean that data is going to be revised more. Now, there's always a trade-off between getting data that's timely and getting data that's accurate. It could wait longer, but then the data wouldn't be as timely.
You're going to rank the current. You go back 50 years. It's the most uncertain that we've ever been about things. Just because of the awful tariffs that obviously you don't like, but I don't. It's not the worst, most uncertainty we've seen. It's always uncertain, Andrew.
Greg, the world is always uncertain. That's for sure. But sometimes there's more uncertainty than others, and sometimes the uncertainty is unnecessary, as a lot of the uncertainty we're facing right now is.
Well, we don't know if it's unnecessary, if it shifts global trade to where the hollowed out center of this country gets fixed and some positive things happen. You don't know the outcome. Go ahead.
Well, Greg, I have a slightly different question, which is, to the extent that you believe the credibility of these numbers in the future is going to be in question, how would you try to get the credibility of those numbers back? Which is to say, is that just about appointing certain people? Is that about transparency around the process? Is that around those numbers matching what other private sector data providers are creating? How, to the extent that there are going to be people today who are going to say, look, China comes out with numbers every month, and every month people look at those numbers and they say, well, we're going to discount that, and we actually need to go look at these other numbers because we're not sure who's really telling the truth. To the extent that that wasn't happening in the United States, if you don't think that was, so people were always comparing some of these numbers against each other anyway, what would you do?
Well, first thing, I'd stop blaming people who don't deserve to be blamed. I think that undermines their integrity, their credibility, in a way that's not helpful for the process. There's no evidence, none, that any of these numbers were rigged in any way, and suggesting they are is a huge step in the wrong direction. Secondly, what I would do is maybe create a commission to study the organization of statistical agencies, get some people who are collecting data in the private sector, trying to figure out if we can combine some of the private sector data with these public surveys in a way to create more accurate estimates. I mean, you've seen revisions over time. For example, the poverty rate is an imperfect measure, and the people who've created the poverty rate over at Census have created alternative poverty measures that they hope corrects some of the problems in the official poverty rate. And similarly, you can imagine the BLS doing something similar. But that's going to take more resources. That's going to take more staff. And unfortunately, that's not what's happening in the budget. Both this administration and some previous administrations have been trying to squeeze the statistical agencies in a way that's not healthy, because they're basically squeezing lots of parts of government because they basically don't believe in a lot of what government does.
Yeah. Probably right about the commission, but those are like the 10 worst words in the English language. They're going to create a commission, and then we're
Well, is there a way to do it? I was going to ask him actually if there was a way to do it, Greg, in the private sector. Maybe you don't believe those numbers either.
Well, he said maybe some type of a hybrid or combination of.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, there can be academic studies too of this. I mean, one of the puzzles out there is that the ADP data and the official BLS data don't track nearly as close as you might expect them to, and that I think is a puzzle.
They converge. It seems. Leisman has pointed out they've converged in the last. Like they were way off, and then they both came to the same number over the past.
Yeah, and so the question is, in real time, how do we weight these different things? And I think that's an interesting question that we don't, as a economist, really have a good answer to quite yet.